I'd like to introduce Susan Madison, who's a member of the State Council on Developmental Disabilities Regional Advisory Committee for the counties of San Diego and Imperial. Susan is a strong advocate, the former ADA director for the city of San Diego, and has worked in the field of disabilities for over 30 years. On this really auspicious occasion of the 30th anniversary of the ADA being passed, July 26th, I would like to ask Susan a few questions. So Susan, I really appreciate you taking the time today to share with our audience what the ADA means to you. So if you could expound upon that, I'd really appreciate it.
It's a great pleasure to be here as always with you. I think that, and I know that for me, the ADA represents the largest and greatest civil rights piece of legislation ever. It's broad. It took a bunch of people. It's a cross disability with disability organizations coming together nationally, which is rare. And it had bipartisan support. And so it took a lot of effort and consensus building, which is fantastic. And we ended up with a sweeping piece, again, of civil rights legislation. My own personal story that triggered this happened in 1975. I was denied access into a clothing store, literally, by the manager of the store, who stood in the aisle and blocked me from entering his store to look at merchandise because I was using a wheelchair. He looked at me and he said his store was full of a lot of people that day, many customers, and he had a lot of merchandise, and literally said to me, "I don't believe there's room in here for you today." I had no choice. I had to leave. I was humiliated, as anyone can understand, and was shocked to realize that in 1975, that was legal in the United States of America, because the Civil Rights Law of 1964 did not cover people with disabilities. And it took until 1990 then to get that civil rights for people with disabilities.
Susan, I'd like to thank you for sharing that story about your personal experience prior to the ADA being passed. Can you tell us what's changed since the ADA is passed?
We can see the obvious things, Marilyn, and we use them every day. All people use them every day. Curb ramps, wider sidewalks. We now have elevators even for two-story buildings that we didn't have before. Those, in a lot of ways, are the simple, easier things. What we also see are American Sign Language, ASL interpreters on TV when there's an emergency or the governor speaks to us about the pandemic. We have accessible buses. We never had those before. And I think the people that are young today don't realize that those never existed in the 70s and 80s. We also have wonderful things like the ability to not discriminate, the law to not discriminate against people with disabilities in employment arenas. So we have an opportunity now to be more fully integrated into the community. The vision of that is wonderful, and we have to be able to remember those changes. We've come a long way, of course, and we have a long ways to go.
Thank you, Susan, for sharing that information about what's changed since the ADA has passed. But could you identify what you believe to be one of the biggest obstacles people with disabilities continue to face?
I believe that the people with disabilities face the biggest barrier for me and for those, attitude. Sometimes I can get in a door, but I'm not given the job because of someone's attitude. Negative biases and stereotypes still exist. I think there's cultural and systemic things that really have not changed in all these years and must be addressed. And that's person by person, looking at your own issues. Maybe it's even fear from someone with a disability of not being able to really work. And so we know that if you believe somebody can't do something, sometimes that creates failure in itself. So that for me is still the biggest barrier. And to change that, we need to have inclusion, because when you get to know people with disabilities, you realize they are competent, they can do a lot of things, they can own their own homes, they can have jobs, and that's the intention of the ADA.
Susan, the information you're sharing today is so helpful for people to understand how important the ADA actually is. Since it's been around for 30 years, you would think our job was done, but clearly it's not. Do you have any ideas on how we can advance the focus of the ADA and move our system forward even further?
You're right, Mary Ellen, our job is never done. We need to know our rights. People with disabilities need to know what their rights are. They need to advocate for themselves, and they need to advocate for others. We need to vote. Justin Dart, considered the father of the ADA, a great disability rights advocate, said vote as if your life depended upon it, because it does. So I want everyone to get registered and to vote. We need to know that inclusion matters and believe inclusion matters. We need to believe in ourselves and go and get jobs, create full inclusion. We need to know, people with disabilities need to know, and others need to know, that we need equal access to health care. We need to have control over our healthcare decisions. We need to be able to live in our own homes. That is what inclusion is really about, and that is the intention of the ADA. Last, I'm going to say vote. Thank you.